Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my top 5 recommendations for beginner fantasy reads. So while I want to make this as quick and easy and painless as possible, I do have a couple of caveats that I want to go over. Obviously, start wherever you want to if you've never read fantasy before. Honestly, this doesn't even apply to people that have never read fantasy before, necessarily. If you are looking for something that's really easy and light to read, you could read any of these books. I do have a mix of YA and adult in here, so pick from it and take from it what you will. These are just some of my favorites. Yes, this is a shameless opportunity for me to plug my favorites yet again on this channel, which means that you've likely heard me talk about some of these books before. However, I wanted to group them all into one kind of easy, cohesive video series, so I will be doing an intermediate fantasy and an advanced fantasy, starting out with beginner. If you're somebody that has never read it before and you are really interested in starting in the fantasy genre, this is a fantastic place to start. If you have any questions or any other suggestions, definitely put them into the comments down below, because obviously this list is not the end-all be-all of all of the options that you have if you are a beginner fantasy reader. But I do just want to start with somebody who writes across the board, middle grade YA. I think she's kind of dabbled into the new adult section, if I'm being perfectly honest. But without any further ado, the first author that I have, probably to the surprise of no one, is Tamora Pierce. Tamora Pierce, one of my favorite authors of all time. She has written so many different series. You have so many different options on where to start. I'm holding up this one because it's the first book in my personal favorite series of what she has written. However, to hold up all of them would be to turn this into an hour-long video. I might do a reading guide to Tamora Pierce at some point in the future. If that sounds interesting to you, definitely let me know. I'll start working on that. But, so, Tamora Pierce. Tamora Pierce has written many series. This is from the Immortals Quartet, which is definitely for people who love animals and love an easy magic world. It's not something that is too crazy difficult to get into. They're very quick reads. Every single book is less than 400 pages. Yeah, 320 something, I think, for this particular one. So I'm just going to give you an overview of the main series that she has. There are several spin-offs that you could go into, but the beginner ones would be The Song of the Lioness, which is a bit of a Mulan type of trope in which she pretends to be a boy so that she can go and be a knight because she has absolutely zero interest in the womanly arts. I guess you could phrase it that way. So Alana pretends to be her brother Tom. He goes off to learn sorcery and magic, and she goes off to the capital of their country to learn to be a knight. And she has to pretend to be a boy in order to do so, because at this time, women are not allowed to be knights. You follow her into her adulthood, and you follow her through all of the things that going through puberty as a girl entails. And that's one of the things that I love about Tamora Pierce, because she was writing these in the 90s and nobody really talks about that at that time. So that's Alana. The Immortals Quartet, I would say, is probably the next series after that, in which you follow Dane. She is a girl with wild magic. She's maybe 11 years old at the beginning of the first book. Wild magic simply means that she has an affinity for animals. She has an ability to speak with them. She has an ability to heal them. It definitely develops as you follow her over the 4 books in this fantastical setting of Tortall, and it's just great. She has so many meaningful relationships with people throughout the course of the series. You get to revisit people from previous series that are really great, and it's just one of the best series that I have as a comfort read out of every book that I own. I love this so much. I've been reading them since I was a kid. The other series that Tamora Pierce has that follows all of those is The Protector of the Small, in which you follow Caladri. She is a woman after women have been officially allowed to join the training to become knights. She is the first person to do so after Alana was knighted, and she has to deal with a lot of criticism and misogyny because of that, because she refuses to give up the part of herself that makes her a girl. So unlike Alana, who pretended to be a boy the entire time and tried to fit in even after it was discovered, so Caladri, she kind of puts an emphasis on it. When she's not in training, she's wearing dresses, she's practicing with a glaive, which in the country that she was born and raised is a very womanly kind of weapon, and she doesn't shy away from the fact that she's a girl. And I appreciate that about the Protector of the Small a lot. You follow her throughout all of her training and into her young adult years as well, and it's just a great wholesome, but action-filled and just amazing, amazing series. Still in the Tortall world, but a bit of a prequel to it, is the Terrier series. This follows Becca Cooper, who is an ancestor of one of the characters from the Alana series. She is kind of a member of the police force of that time. This takes place several hundred years before the first Alana book. She's in training to become a member of the city guard, and if any kind of like criminal procedural kind of element appeals to you, but in like a fantasy setting, Terrier is definitely where you should start with Tamora Pierce, because Becca Cooper is one of my absolute favorites of Tamora Pierce's characters, and it is written in a completely different manner than any of the other books that she has. The entire Terrier series is written in the format of Becca's journal entries. So you see her progress in her learning as the books continue on, and as time progresses through the books, her spelling improves, her grammar improves, and pretty much just like her general being, you can see it change throughout the course of the series. There's a couple more series that Tamora Pierce has that spins off of these main four. I think that was four. Yeah, four. But I'm not going to go into them because I honestly believe that these are the ones that you should start with if any of those interest you. She has another series that is called The Circle of Magic. This takes place in a country called Emelon. I don't remember what the world there is called. You follow 4 young children who have been orphaned by various means. Maybe not necessarily orphaned, but they are kind of left adrift without any help. They've discovered that they have these magical abilities with a specific affinity for things. Sandry has an affinity for weaving magic, kind of, and threads. Triss has an affinity for weather, Daja has an affinity for metalwork, and Briar has an affinity for plants. So they are kind of adopted into this university in which these 2 women are taking care of them and raising them and teaching them how to use their powers that are very different from a lot of the other powers that the people at the university have. And you watch them as they grow. They have to deal with a lot of university politics and major life-changing events, I guess you could say. It's been a minute since I've read those, but I have really enjoyed them. There is the Circle of Magic, there is the Circle Opens, which is when the 4 kids go their own directions with their specific mentor, and they all kind of split up, and then there's several books in which they are all reunited again after a couple of years have passed and they have to deal with it. They called each other foster siblings, so they were raised together, and they just have to deal with a bit of a readjustment after they're all reunited, but have dealt with these very, very adult themes after they have gone their separate ways. So I really, really like the Circle of Magic, but I do have a preference for Tortall. Again, if any of that sounds interesting to you, most of these do start as middle grade, and then I really do think that they change to young adult and even new adult as you progress through the series and you're growing up with the characters. But Tamora Pierce, I've been talking about her for long enough, is one of my favorite authors of all time. The next series that I have to talk to you about is the Seven Realms series by Cinda Williams-Chima. You have heard me talk about her on this channel before. This is one of my all-time favorite young adult series, and it is very classic YA fantasy. But I think that that's what makes it such a good beginner's place to start, because once you're entering into this fantasy genre, you aren't necessarily familiar with all of the tropes, and therefore you're not tired of them yet. And because of that, I think that Seven Realms, it just has this, I don't know how to describe it, like 2000s YA charm to it. There's really nothing that makes it, incredibly unique in terms of the actual plot, but the characters and the world that Cinda Williams-Chima has built throughout the Seven Realms series is just so fascinating. The characters are so endearing, and the magic is not very, complicated, so it is very easy to follow and understand. So the Seven Realms series, you follow Han, who is, at this time, a street lord. He runs a gang in the city of the capital of the country that they're from, and he is called Cuffs because he wears these cuffs on his wrists at all times. He's had them for as long as he can remember, and he's pretty much a thief, essentially. And you also follow Risa, who is a princess of the realm. She has been raised to be so, but she doesn't necessarily love that about herself. She would rather go and spend time with her father's side of the family, who are essentially the native people of this particular land. And while they are ruled by the queen and they have an understanding with this queen, they do kind of long for the time when they were their own separate people again, or when they at least had somebody on the throne that had their best interests at heart. There's a little bit of a political commentary behind all of that, and it's not very deep, so obviously you can kind of see where all of that's going. But you follow these two as they do meet each other accidentally. There is a magical school involved once you get, I think, to the second book, and there's a lot of magical political stuff happening that introduces you into the world of fantasy politics. So if political fantasy is something that you think might be what you're interested in, this wouldn't be a terrible place for you to start. There's also a romance going on throughout the entire series, which is delightful, and I honestly love it. It's just a great comfort read for me, and honestly, I think that if you have never read anything that is fantasy before, this is also a very good place for you to start. It does spin off into the Shattered Realms series that follows the children of some of the characters of this series. I don't necessarily love that as much. I am working my way through it. I haven't finished it yet, but honestly, if you were to just read this one and you like the way that it ended, you could be satisfied with that. The remaining suggestions that I have are all technically considered to be adult fantasy. These two I'm going to lump into the same category because I think that they would appeal to the same type of people. So first is Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is the first book of the Dresden Files, which is, to be fair, a very lengthy and ongoing series. We're on something like book 18, and I want to say he plans like 23 to 25 books in it. I've been reading them since the early 2000s, and this is urban fantasy. It takes place in modern-day Chicago. You follow Harry Dresden, who is an out and proud wizard. He has an advertisement in the Yellow Pages, back when those were still, a thing, in which he advertises himself as a wizard, and it's not necessarily the best living for him to make. He doesn't make a ton of money doing it. He does occasionally consult for Chicago PD and help them with some of their cases that they can't necessarily figure out because there might be a supernatural element to them. And in this first book, somebody tries to hire his services, and the Chicago PD also tries to hire his services because a double murder happens. It's very much a magical murder mystery as well. The first books in the Dresden Files, I would argue, are definitely not as strong in comparison to the later books. The first several follow a very Monster of the Week type of feel, and that's part of what people love about them. The Monster of the Week is just such a delight when you just need something easy and quick to read. Now, it does tend to get heavier, and the plot tends to get bigger as you progress through the series. A lot of people have a very difficult time with Harry Dresden as a character. They kind of feel like Jim Butcher's writing kind of shows him as a bit of a misogynist. It's not necessarily great, although I will say that those moments do improve as you get through the series, so if you can ignore them, if that's something that bothers you, definitely just kind of push through, and it will get better, I promise. Lumped into the same category, but for me is honestly the more enjoyable series, is the Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearn. This is the first book, Hounded. This is one of my favorite series of all time, but I find that a lot of people, if they don't necessarily love the Dresden Files, they do tend to gravitate towards the Iron Druid Chronicles instead. So this follows Atticus O'Sullivan. He owns a rare book dealership in Phoenix, Arizona. He has a Irish wolfhound named Oberon who he can talk to with his mind, and Oberon is a delight, let me just tell you that. But Atticus is 2,000 years old and he's a druid. He has made many, many mistakes over those years, and the entire series is pretty much about how all of the mistakes that he's made have come back to haunt him. In this first one in particular, he comes to the attention of a Celtic god named Angus Og, who has been hunting him for many, many years because he stole a sword, and Angus Og wants his sword back. And so he's got to deal with the consequences of that, but it is also, it's not necessarily Monster of the Week so much as Bad Guy of the Week. You've got witches, you've got vampires, you've got all of the gods of all of the different pantheons from the entire world. You dive into Celtic mythology a lot, specifically because Atticus is a druid, but you also explore other pantheons like Norse and Hindu. Chinese mythology makes an appearance later on in the series. It's an amazing series. It's fantastic. However, it does get a little bit of criticism because these earlier books are not written as well as some of the later ones. I would argue that I do enjoy Kevin Hearn's writing style better than Jim Butcher's writing style. It does lack just a little bit as much of the misogyny that you tend to find in the earlier Dresden Files. And honestly, if you want an animal companion, this is the way to go. While there is an animal companion in the Dresden Files, Oberon talks, and that just adds an entire element that the other series does not have. So I highly recommend this to you. It's definitely an easy, quick read. The beginning books are less than 400 pages apiece, and it's such a fun time. It's definitely a laugh out loud throughout a lot of the books because of not just Oberon, but because of Atticus himself and the circumstances that surround all of the stuff that he's going through. It's just an enjoyable time. My next choice might be a little bit of a controversial opinion because I know that this series gets a lot of hate on BookTube and on the rest of the Bookternet and whatever, but since I don't have a physical copy of it anymore, I lent it to somebody a long time ago and I haven't replaced it. That is Wizard's First Rule, the first book of the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind, who has since passed away. This series is completely finished. There will be no more in it. This is a very, very classic fantasy, no matter what the author himself tended to say about it. It is a fantasy series. It is full of a lot of the tropes that, as seasoned fantasy readers, a lot of us are used to seeing, but if you're not used to them yet, I think that this is a very good place for you to start. There's nothing particularly complicated about this world, in all honesty. And there are pieces of this series that have its problems, to be fair, but in terms of ease of reading, in terms of overarching fantasy stories, I think that The Sword of Truth is a really good place for you to start if you've never read anything like this before. So The Sword of Truth follows Richard, and Richard is just a woodsman living his life when one day he finds out that his father has passed away. And this is the same day that I believe he sees a mysterious woman in white walking through the woods being chased by somebody, and he stops to help her and kind of saves her life, although she kind of saves her own life. And this begins a series of events that changes his life completely. I don't want to say too much more on that because it spoils a lot that happens in the first 25% of the book, that it's kind of fun to find out if you couldn't see where it was coming from. But he picks up a lot of fun companions along the way. He goes through a lot of life changes and has to make a lot of decisions. He makes a lot of discoveries about himself and his past. He picks up something called the Sword of Truth, which is, of course, the stereotypical magical sword trope, but it's just, honestly, it's a fun time. The first book is very, very good. I believe that there are 9 books in the original series. Terry Goodkind had written a couple of spin-off series after that and a couple of different books after that. I honestly don't think that you need to read them, but in terms of the overarching plots of the first 9 books, they're an enjoyable time. They're nothing too heavy that you... Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of heavy stuff that happens. But in terms of understanding the plotline and the magic and the characters, it's a very easily consumable read. The last series that I have on this list follows in the same vein in that I believe that it is controversial because a lot of people don't think that it's very good, and that is Chronicles of Blood and Stone by Robert Newcomb. This is the 5th Sorceress, and this is a trilogy. You follow Tristan, and he is the prince of a country called Eutracia, and on the day that he is supposed to take over for his father and become king, he doesn't really want to, but he has to because that's his role, everybody in his family and everybody in the castle that he's friends with is murdered by invaders. This happens very early on. This is not a spoiler. I'm pretty sure it's on the back. And you find out that somebody has been plotting against this country for centuries, and it's this ongoing plot that has been in place for a very long time, and it is all coming to a head in the very beginning of this book, and he sets off to get revenge on the people that murdered his entire family. I don't really want to go too in-depth on this one. I've been talking for a very, very long time. It's definitely similar to The Sword of Truth in terms of the fact that it's really nothing original. We've seen this type of fantasy many, many times before, but if you are new to the genre, and if it's not something that you have read before, the tropes and the familiar plot lines that some of us might see are not necessarily what you would get out of this, and that's what happened to me. I read this book when I was in middle school, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the series, I loved what happens throughout, I love the way that evil is not necessarily just black or white throughout the trilogy, and I love the characters as well. I had a very good time. Some of the characters do seem like a little bit of a Sword of Truth knockoff. If you've read this, you might know what I'm talking about, but I enjoyed them immensely, and they, for a very long time, were books that I reread every single year. So if this is something that interests you, again, very typical sword and sorcery. There are a couple of different things that you don't necessarily see in other books in terms of magical experimentation. I think the magic system is a little bit more unique than it is in Sword of Truth. and I do like the characters a lot. I believe there might also be a slight romance in this one, as there is in the Sword of Truth as well. So if any of that appeals to you, definitely go and pick this up. So there you guys have it. Those are the 5, technically 6, series that I recommend. Well, there's actually more than 6 if you count all of the things that I talked about for Tamora Pierce. We'll go with authors. Those are the 6 authors that I recommend you start out with if you are interested in doing fantasy for the first time, if you never have before, or if you're interested in a really easy and easily consumable read. Definitely recommend all of these if you have not read them before. If you have, talk to me in the comments, let me know what you think of them. If you have any additions to this list, definitely throw them down there as well. But that's it for me today, guys. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out my channel. Down in the description box, you're going to see links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. But I'll talk to you in my next one. Bye!